to welcome you all on today's special webinar on celebrating the United Nations Day. My name is Ikra Banu Suhail, and I am a research associate for Chair International Law here at IPRI. This year, 24th October 2024, officially marks 79 years since the founding of the United Nations. This is a momentous occasion to reflect on the UN's enduring mission to foster global peace, security, and development. We are honored to have a distinguished panel of speakers with us today who will offer their valuable insights on the crucial role of the United Nations in shaping our collective future. So, before we dive into the discussions, I would like to start by introducing our panelists. We have His Excellency Ambassador Khalil Hashmi. Ambassador Hashmi assumed his responsibilities as Pakistan's envoy to People's Republic of China in 2023. Prior to his appointment, Ambassador Hashmi served as permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations, other international organizations, and Conference on Disarmament in Geneva from 2019 to 2023. Ambassador Hashmi has previously worked as Director General, United Nations, European Region and Arms Control, and as Director for Disarmament Affairs, India and South Asia region at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has worked on a range of policy issues related to arms control, counterterrorism, human rights, and climate change. We then have Dr. Tughrul Yameen, who has served in the Pakistan Army, where he undertook several prestigious command, staff, and teaching assignments. The list notably includes his deployment with the Pakistan Armored Brigade in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and as a liaison officer for his battalion during its participation in the UN peacekeeping operations in Somalia. He is the founding member and former Associate Dean of the Center of International Peace and Stability at the National University of Sciences and Technology. He is the author of 2 books, The Evolution of Nuclear Deterrence and Its Impact on South Asian Stability, and Developing Confidence-Building Measures in Information Space Between India and Pakistan. Then we have Dr. Sadia Zahoor, who is a highly accomplished scholar of international law with expertise in both policymaking and academia. Her professional experience spans key roles, including serving as policy expert at Pakistan's National Security Division and as a legal consultant for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Dr. Zahoor has also held the positions of Assistant Legal Advisor at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Assistant Professor at Bahria University. Dr. Zahoor holds an LLB Honors, LLM in International Law, and PhD in Law from International Islamic University. She was a fellow at the prestigious Research Center of the Hague Academy of International Law in the Netherlands and has furthered her expertise with certifications from the Singapore International Arbitration Academy and Harvard University. I would like to thank everyone again for joining us today. Now it is my distinct honor to ask President IPRI, Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed, for his welcome remarks. Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed prestigious command and staff assignments. He also served as Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Defense Production and has served as the Ambassador of Pakistan to Mauritius, Madagascar, Seychelles, and Comoros. He has been Executive Director Services in the Army Welfare Trust and advisor to the President National Defense University. With that, I would like, yes, sir, the floor is yours.
For being with us, Ms. Sadia Zahoor, Ambassador Khalil Hashmi, and Dr. Tughrul Yameen is going to join us. And we also have sitting with me Ambassador Durrani, who has also had multifarious deployments in the diplomacy in various spheres. As we commemorate today the United Nations 79th year's completion, we see United Nations history as kind of history filled with happiness, sorrows, with successes and certain failures as well. It was created basically, it was built around the issues like, most importantly, for collective peace, harmony, and collective good of the world. Over the years, it also came to include certain other challenges to its mandate, like climate change, inequality, human rights violations, regional conflicts, etc. What is happening now today is very, very important to understand that a war is going on in Gaza. There are attacks going on in Lebanon. Multiple peoples have been killed, perhaps 60,000 or more, and most of them are women and children, non-combatants. United Nations efforts to call for a ceasefire there, call for a humanitarian aid corridor have fallen on the deaf ears. So this brings us to one important question: how efficacious United Nations still remains, although it has done very well in past, but in last few years, it appears that perhaps no one is listening to United Nations. And the Secretary General of the United Nations has been actually declared kind of persona non grata by the Israeli government. The important would be how to keep it relevant and how to keep it efficacious. A lot depends upon the P5, who are actually the locomotive, the main force of running the United Nations. With this brief question that how to keep it relevant and more efficacious, I hand you over back to Banu. Thank you, Banu.
Thank you so much, sir. And with that, I would like to officially begin the session. Unfortunately, our first speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Khalil Hashmi, was unable to join us live today. However, we are grateful that he shared a special video message on the important topic of United Nations, multilateralism, and the quest for international cooperation. We deeply appreciate his contribution to this discussion, and without further ado, let us play the message from Ambassador Hashmi.
Honorable Dr. Raza Mohammed, President, Islamabad Policy Research Institute, distinguished fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking IPRI for organizing this important seminar and for the opportunity to share some thoughts on the enduring salience of multilateralism, the United Nations, and international cooperation. These subjects are especially close to my heart as I have spent a substantial part of my career in multilateral settings, including as permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations in Geneva, Director General of Multilateral Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and during 2 terms in Pakistan's permanent mission in New York. Let me offer some reflections from both as a practitioner and now as an observer. But before I do that, I commend IPRI for choosing this thoughtful and timely theme. For me, United Nations, multilateralism, and the quest for international cooperation. And this is important because as we navigate the regional, international, and thematic landscapes, we find ourselves in a particularly challenging environment. All three, the United Nations, multilateralism, and international cooperation, are essential and mutually reinforcing. But in many ways, there is a noticeable regression in each area as we speak. Each one is in retreat, and that is why it is both urgent and vital to speak about these subjects. Today, as we reflect on the UN's role, we are reminded of its indispensability, continued relevance, and necessity, without which the multitude of challenges in the peace, security, and development arena cannot be tackled meaningfully. Even as the United Nations is indispensable as an institution, it is even more consequential for its members to adhere to and act faithfully in accordance with the UN Charter principles and purposes. The regression and retreat that I spoke about is primarily stemming from this lack of adherence and compliance, especially by powerful states. The United Nations is the embodiment of multilateralism. It represents a mechanism, a medium, a modality to promote the mission of the United Nations as an institution to deliver on its mandates, but also to provide a platform to deliberate and negotiate complex crises and evolve collective solutions. Multilateralism is irreplaceable in terms of its convening power and legitimacy. It recognizes that no single nation or a group of nations, no matter how powerful, can solve the world's problems alone or in small settings. By definition, the DNA of multilateralism signifies dialogue, negotiations, and diplomacy, fostering an environment where states can cooperate on equal footing, irrespective of their size, military power, or economic might. At their core, multilateralism and international cooperation are about shared responsibility and mutual respect. The challenges we face today, from geopolitical tensions, global pandemics, and terrorism to environmental degradation and cyber threats, are transnational in nature and require collective action. Conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia have exposed the limitations of unilateral actions and underscored the need for inclusive multilateral solutions. The United Nations remains at the forefront of these efforts, yet the United Nations is and can be as strong and as effective as its member states allow it to be. The UN Security Council is one such example where over a decade-long impasse between permanent members has begun to define the institution itself. Its inability to act and respond to the colossal loss of Palestinian lives underscores the structural limitation towards adding more permanent seats as parts of its reform process. Pursuit of international cooperation is not without its challenges. In recent years, we have witnessed a rise in unilateralism, protectionism, and great power rivalries that threaten to undermine the very foundation of the multilateral system. The erosion of trust between nations, the breakdown of arms control agreements, and the polarization of international institutions have contributed to a more fragmented and volatile world. At this critical juncture, it is more important than ever to reaffirm our commitment to the principles of multilateralism and the United Nations. Support for the UN, multilateralism, and international cooperation is a cardinal policy principle of Pakistan. Pakistan has led, contributed to, and shaped international policy and operational responses to matters of peace, security, and development regionally as well as globally. On the peace and security front, Pakistan has made tangible contributions as one of the largest contingents to over 24 UN peacekeeping operations in almost all continents of the world. We have piloted resolutions in the UN Security Council on peacekeeping policy and its orientation. We have offered concrete proposals and drafted resolutions and working papers on arms control and disarmament matters in the UN General Assembly in New York and Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. Pakistan's valuable contribution in developing the normative, policy, and operational framework on counterterrorism is well recognized. Pakistan has played a lead role in shaping the UN strategy to counter terrorism and its periodic reviews. When it comes to shaping policy and operational responses to challenges of development, climate change, and environmental degradation, Pakistan has acquitted itself very ably and effectively. We are proud to have led the Global South in advocating for the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund during our leadership of the Group of 77 in China at the 2022 UN Climate Change Conference, which is also known as COP27. The United Nations has also been a driving force in the promotion and protection of human rights worldwide. In this area too, Pakistan's contribution has been significant, ranging from early days of the drafting of Universal Declaration of Human Rights to other instruments, resolutions, and normative deliberations. We have actively contributed to the work of the UN Human Rights Council, advocating for the realization of the rights of Kashmiris and Palestinian people, piloting resolution on combating Islamophobia, piloting resolution on countering religious hatred, and leading discussion on the indispensability of pursuing political, economic, civil, and cultural rights for everyone simultaneously. As Pakistan gets ready to assume its non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council for the eighth term in 2025-2026, we remain committed to playing our role in furthering the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, strengthening of multilateralism as a matter of both choice and necessity, and to fostering a world based on international cooperation, harmonious coexistence, and win-win cooperation. I am confident Pakistan's diplomacy will continue to stand by the United Nations as an institution of first resort, faithful compliance with its charter, and a world order with the UN at its core. I very much hope big and powerful states demonstrate their commitment to the UN, multilateralism, and international cooperation by walking the talk. I thank you all.
We would again like to thank Ambassador Hashmi for such an insightful discussion. I would now like to move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Tugrul Yameen. Sir, how has Pakistan's experience and contribution to international peacekeeping operations shapes its role on the global stage? And what lessons can other nations learn from Pakistan's participation in the United Nations peacekeeping missions?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, General Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed, my friend and former colleague. We've been together at many places, and the other distinguished speakers and the very efficient staff of IPRI. I am presently located at a place where the internet is a little patchy, so I hope you will bear with me. So IPRA Sohail is going to help me share my slides. IPRA, can you start the slideshow, please?
Yes, sir.
Let's say, okay, you can full screen it, please. So I have put together a small presentation, and I hope this will help clarify if you have any doubts. I don't think there will be any doubts. But this will help make my presentation easier. Next slide, please. So these are a few books that I have written on peacekeeping operations. The first one is Pakistan's peacekeeping operation in Somalia in 92 to 95. My battalion, 7th Frontier Force, was the first one to land in Mogadishu. So this particular book is a labor of love. I put in a lot of effort in it, and I interviewed all the major actors in it. My battalion went again to for peacekeeping operations and returned last year. It's a rare honor. And then the second book is about international peacekeeping, which is an edited book, and I had written it because I want students who are interested in peacekeeping to read it. This is supposed to be a textbook. And the third book is a historical account of Pakistan's participation in peacekeeping operations since 1960. So I'm sure IPRI and the research associates and assistants will make use of it, and also students of universities and other higher education institutions would find these useful. Next slide, please, Iqra. So investors are sitting over here and they know more than me. 3 of them, one just spoke, and one is about to speak. So, but nonetheless, this is what I found out, that Pakistan's, what have been the foreign policy motivations of Pakistan in participating in UN peacekeeping operations. Dear listeners, the first major foreign policy decision which was taken after independence was to apply for the membership of the UN. And Ambassador Hashmi spoke about the necessity of multilateralism. So Pakistan very soon realized that it must be part of the major multilateral organization that had been created in the aftermath of the Second World War. So immediately upon independence, Pakistan applied for it, and Pakistan became a member of the United Nations organization on 30 September 1947. And we know there was only one opposition, but there are various stories about it. And Ambassador Durrani is a better judge to speak on that. Then our foreign policy guidelines are based on what Qaid-e-Azam said. And he said that Pakistan wants friendly relations with all countries of the world within the framework of the United Nations Charter. So again, our leader was mentioning the United Nations as a framework of larger multilateralism. And UN peacekeeping operations have over time become an essential tenet of Pakistan's foreign policy. So these are the three things that I wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. So this is what Muhammad Ali Jinnah said about Pakistan's foreign policy, and you can find this on MOFA's website also. He said, our foreign policy is one of friendliness and goodwill towards all nations of the world. He did not say that we are going to have bad relations with any country, not India, not any other country. He said, we do not cherish aggressive designs against any country or nation. We believe in the principle of honesty and fair play in national and international dealings, and are prepared to make our utmost contribution to the promotion of peace and prosperity among the nations of the world. Pakistan will never be found lacking in extending its material and moral support to the oppressed and suppressed peoples of the world, and in upholding the principles of the United Nations Charter. So this was what Qaid-e-Azam Jinnah's vision was about Pakistan's foreign policy, and United Nations peacekeeping operations is part of that policy guideline. Next one, please. What has Pakistan gained from participating in UN peacekeeping operations? This is a question that I'm often asked. People say that United Nations has not performed the way it should have performed over the last 75 odd years, more than that now. But there are certainly things which has benefited Pakistan. Number one, international peacekeeping experience at the diplomatic and military level. So this is, you come into contact, our diplomats, our civil servants, our military officers, our police officers, they come into contact with other nations at various levels. Then it displays Pakistan's earnestness to act as a responsible member of the UN. Pakistan shows that it will not shirk its responsibility as a responsible member. Then it highlights Pakistan's soft image as provider of humanitarian aid and insurer of human security. It really warms my heart when I see young ladies and young female officers, and young male officers and young soldiers also performing in conflict zones where their own life is in mortal danger, but they are providing humanitarian assistance to them. They are providing them medical aid. They're providing them solace under very difficult conditions. And it has earned the gratitude of people caught in conflict zones. People have gone on record, common man, common people who have been rescued and under the protection of civilian program, they have gone on record and said that Pakistani peacekeepers have really lived up to their name. And it has helped build good relations with host nations and participating countries. And we can build up on these good relations that Pakistani peacekeepers have created. And in times of acute isolation, peacekeeping has actually broken the mold. For example, I can tell you that when Pakistani troops were sent to Somalia and Cambodia, we were under extreme sanctions under the Pressler Amendment. And this broke the international isolation of Pakistan. Pakistan, after 1979, was being isolated. But peacekeeping actually saved the day for Pakistan. So this Pakistan had made a very strategic investment in peacekeeping. Next slide, please. So who all have participated in peacekeeping duties? So it's not just soldiers. Our diplomats have occupied very high positions. They have been the special representatives of the Secretary General. And that has shown the caliber of our diplomats. If you're selected as a special representative of the Secretary General, it goes to show that the Secretary General has faith in you. So a number of our esteemed ambassadors have been on these prize appointments. Then international civil servants, people who are working for the UN, can also be employed as part of the peacekeeping operations. Then obviously Pakistan Army contributes fully to these operations. They provide commanders, they provide staff officers, they provide combat soldiers, they provide special forces, helicopter pilots, combat engineers, doctors and medical staff, logisticians, IT specialists, lawyers, journalists, canine handlers, and military observers. And a very important component of our peacekeepers today are ladies. They are, as per the UN requirement, uh, uh, we are providing gender balance to our peacekeepers. And it is for Pakistan a great deal of matter of honor that these young women often leave behind newborn children and young families behind, uh, because they want to uh, deliver, they want to say yes to the call of duty. And going from a conservative society like ours, it goes to show that Pakistan is not uh, backward in that sense, that our women are also willing to participate in dangerous missions abroad. Then Pakistan Navy has participated, particularly in case of transporting large contingents from Pakistan to Africa, to Europe, to other countries. Pakistan Police has participated. It's still participating. Their number is increasing. Civil armed forces have participated. INGO workers have participated, and also UN uh, uh, volunteers. Pakistanis have also participated as UN volunteers. So these are all people who have participated, who can participate within the UN systems. Next slide, please. So I want to show you some main statistics. First of all of us know that Pakistan is one of the first countries where military observers were deployed. There are two uh, places where military observers were deployed. One was Palestine. Palestine was the first one. Pakistan is the second one. So Pakistan still hosts them, and they do report upon ceasefire violations. And in Congo, 1960, first Pakistani peacekeepers were deployed. And they were not combat soldiers, they were logisticians. They had gone there to provide um, uh, movement control as drivers, as ordnance men. So this goes to show that it's not combat soldiers alone who are part of peacekeeping operations. Logisticians also play an important role. So far, Pakistan has provided 235,000 troops on 48 peacekeeping missions in 29 countries in Asia, Africa, America, and Europe. And over 3,500 troops are presently deployed. It's a very large number given our own precarious security situation, almost a brigade strength. 181 peacekeepers, both men and women, including 27 officers, have laid down their lives in the service of humanity. So this is a great credit. You are not laying down your life for your country. You are laying down your life as a blue helmeted peacekeeper for the sake of humanity. Uh, And a very important day, 5th of January 1993 in Mogadishu, Somalia, Pakistan lost 24 peacekeepers on a single day. And this included a few peacekeepers from my own unit also. This is important because in October the same year, the Americans lost 18 Marines in an abortive mission, and they decided to leave. Within months, they departed. And it has happened in other peacekeeping missions also. For example, Mali, many countries have left, and missions like Sierra Leone, where India left. So Pakistan has always stayed the course. So Pakistani peacekeepers have served on some of the most dangerous missions in the world and have completed the task successfully. It is a matter of great honor, and this has been acknowledged by UN Secretary Generals at various forums. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. The next challenge, as far as I am concerned, I think it is the formulation of a UN protection force for Palestine. I've written on it in various places. I've spoken about it. This is the immediate challenge for UN peacekeeping, for the United Nations, for the world at large. As all of us know that 7th of October 2023, there was a retaliation by Hamas and some hostage taking, and the Israelis, they call it the Israeli Defense Force, I call it the Israeli Destruction Force. They retaliated, and they are still retaliating, and they are committing genocide in Gaza, Palestine at large, and their operations have also extended into Lebanon now. So there is a international United Nations Security Council Resolution 2150 of 2014. So this is a clause which says that it's the responsibility of international community to protect civilians. This was passed after the genocide in Rwanda and Srebrenica. In Srebrenica, 8,000 Bosnians were killed, and in Rwanda, 80,000 Houthis were killed. So this was, and Pakistani diplomats took a very active role in ensuring that this particular resolution is passed. So under this resolution, it's first of all the individual state's responsibility to ensure the protection of its population from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Second, the international community is required to set up an early warning mechanism to prevent such a happening. Third, if these instruments fail, the international community is ultimately responsible for taking action in a timely and decisive manner on the basis of the UN Charter. Pakistan has called upon for the need of protection force for the civilians under R2P, responsibility to protect. The army chief had met the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, where he has said that Pakistan had Turkey, and Turkey had offered a global protection force in 2022 after one of the Israeli crackdowns in Gaza, and actually in the West Bank. And there was also a Bahrain declaration of the Arab League in which this protection force under this clause of responsibility to protect was underscored. So my personal opinion is that this is the next challenge for the world at large. If we want really multilateralism to succeed, and if we want bloodshed to stop in this world, then a protection force for Palestine must be constituted. So that's about all from my side. I think the last slide is just a farewell slide. Last slide, please. Can we see the last slide, please? So can I have the last slide, please?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, IPRI, for your support. Thank you. Thank you, everybody at IPRI. IPRI is a fantastic organization, and it's always a pleasure to contribute anything that one can. for IPRI. Thank you very much.
Very rich and very nice expose. I was just recollecting the incident of Black Hawk Down. Will you like to share something on that?
Yeah, sure. Black Hawk Down incident took place on the 3rd of October, 1993. The Americans had got some information that the IRI's top generals were congregating in Olympic Hotel, and they thought that in a lightning move they could just swoop down and capture these whether they were truly there or not, that's another point, moot point. But they thought they could just move down a heliborne operation as well as a ground operation. The Marines went on through. They launched one prong from the ground, and the helicopters went on top. And they were not just Black Hawks; there were other helicopters also. The information probably was wrong, or the Somalis had already got whiff of the news that the Americans are coming, so they could not find anybody there, or before they could find anybody there, one of their Black Hawks was shot down, and its pilot was dragged on the streets of Bakara market in Mogadishu. The images of the pilot being dragged were flashed on international screens. It brought a lot of bad name to the American Marines, and that is not all. Pakistani troops were asked to provide to evacuate them, and there was a squadron of
I think we mute again.
Unmute करें.
So they evacuated them very successfully.
सर वो बीच में आपकी आवाज
सॉरी, मैं ये कह रहा था कि पाकिस्तानी रैपिड रिएक्शन फोर्स जो गई थी, जिसमें 15 FF की एक मोबाइल प्लेटून थी और 19 लांसर का एक स्क्वाड्रन था, और इसमें ये मैं बात वजाहत करना चाहता हूँ कि जब पाकिस्तानियों पर अटैक हुआ था जून 1993 में, तो जब पाकिस्तानियों ने कहा भाई हमें मदद की ज़रूरत है, क्योंकि हमें भी गलत इन्फॉर्मेशन भेजा गया था, सॉफ्ट स्किन व्हीकल से भेजा गया था, कोई टैंक कोई हमारे साथ नहीं थे, उनसे कहा गया था कि आप जाके ये चेक करेंगे इनके एम्यूनिशन वेपन साइट्स पे, और सोमालीज ने ये कहा था, जो फरादीद का फैक्शन था, कि दिस विल बी एन एक्ट ऑफ वॉर, इफ यू गो एंड चेक आवर साइट्स वी विल कंसिडर एज एन एक्ट ऑफ वॉर। पाकिस्तानियों को नहीं बताया गया था। जब पाकिस्तानियों पर हमला हुआ, वी आस्क्ड फॉर हेल्प, इटालियंस सेड वी आर गोइंग टू आस्क रोम, नोबडी केम फॉर हेल्प। जो भी किया लोगों ने खुद किया, अपनी जान बचाई। मगर जब हमें कहा गया अमेरिकन मरीन्स ने कि जी आप, जनरल थॉमस मॉन्टगोमरी वाज द डेप्टी फोर्स कमांडर एंड he was the American soldier on spot, when he asked for rescue and relief, we immediately sent our forces. And if you see Black Hawk Down, there is a very wrong impression in that. They show that the Americans are asking for Pakistanis for help, and the Pakistani commander is saying that, did you ask us when you were going there? This is absolutely BS. This did not happen. Pakistani responded. In my book, it is very clearly mentioned. Then when call for help went there, Pakistanis went there. But I want to acknowledge that once Pakistanis did save the American Marines, there was a formal acknowledgement by Thomas Montgomery. He wrote a letter and he said that the Americans who were saved were because of the Pakistanis, and there was an odd Malaysian APC also in that operation. But that was a moment of great pride for Pakistan, and I think we can still cash on it. So I hope I was audible this time. Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
was
sir.
I able to?
Thank you. आप बानू बता दो.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank. And I will be signing off now.
Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. It was an honor.
Thank you, Ikra. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
I would now like to move on to our next speaker, which is Ms. Sadia Zahoor. Ma'am, in what ways has the United Nations contributed to the development and enforcement of international law, and how effective has it been in ensuring compliance by member states with these legal frameworks?
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. I hope you can hear me. So you have my slides. Yeah, okay. So I was listening to both Hashmi and Toghrul Saab, and I was thinking, is my presentation too aloof from what is happening around us? And even when I was making this presentation, I was thinking, are we over obsessed to deal with all issues, international issues, in light of international law? And then because last couple of years, I think international law has failed in like international global community in ways that has hurt somebody like me, who has been a supporter of international law. But international law is something which is embedded in the Constitution of the Charter of the United Nations. And if you can go to the next slide, you will see that this is not a question that's in my mind. I think it was debated by many scholars. Is United Nations, and if you will ever search for United Nations, you will find out it's a political and diplomatic institution. But when the San Francisco conference was happening, there was an emphasis that international law should be the foundation of the United Nations. And hence, there is not only the reference of international law in the preamble, but also in Article 1, which explains the purposes of the United Nations. So the whole idea that, the global community came together to ensure peace and stability by ensuring the conformity with principles of international law. So the idea was to make sure that we have a peaceful resolution of conflicts, and international law will play a major role. So, before going into how United Nations and its organs and its agencies have helped in codification of international law and implementation of international law, the important thing is the Charter itself is a product of international law and has given international law importance, which was the idea of the framers and the drafters of the UN Charter. So next slide, please. In the preamble, also you can see that the people have we have collectively the global community came together and thought at that time at least 51 countries to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligation arising from the treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. Both Article 1 and preamble, and whatever I was listening to Hashmi Saab and Toghrul Saab, I was thinking that if the global community from Israel to Palestine to Russia to Ukraine, if everybody was following international law principles, we would have seen the scenes that we have seen in last 1.5 years or 2 years. And that was the idea that, you have a peaceful settlement disputes, and peaceful settlement disputes will be led by international law. Before we go to the codification and how organs have helped, in the next slide, you will be able to see that in United Nations, its charter itself has codified some of the basic principles that we talk about. So, I often have this discussion where people think that United Nations is not effective, it is not needed, or it should be replaced or even abolished. And I think obviously things are not static, things keep on evolving, and probably we will have something else in future. But we have to remember that today, when we say that other countries are not respectful of sovereignty, all states are equal, whether Palestine is a small or weak government, it still has rights. So all those principles of equality, provision of use of force, equality of states, all these principles were themselves codified in the UN Charter, which form the basis of international law as we see it today. So it's not just the organs and the agencies that have helped in the codification and implementation of the international law. The Charter itself is a great example where the principles of international law have been codified. Next slide, please. So Article 13 is one of the is the third reference of international law in the UN Charter, and it is what why UN plays a role in codification and implementation. So interestingly, not in the San Francisco conference, but the conference before it. In Washington conference, 1944, actually China gave this suggestion to add initiative to General Assembly's role should include initiating of studies and make recommendation and promoting international cooperation. And then Egyptian proposal was to what we see today. It came from Egypt, which is a progressive development of international law and its codification. So Chinese and Egyptian proposal gave one of the important functions of General Assembly, which is not only to initiate studies, and that could be about anything, including international law. And second is the progressive development of and codification of international law. So we can, obviously UN Charter didn't explain what is progressive development. It didn't explain what is codification, but the mere presence of this article has led to the creation of many other subsidiary organs and agencies within the UN, and has helped the growth of international law, as we will see the next few slides. Please, next slide. So progressive development and codification were later explained. The definition that you are probably seeing here is from the Charter of ILA, which is International Law Commission, which is a subsidiary body of United Nations. So progressive development is when there is not enough international law practice. So it is a duty of international of the UN to actually make sure that law should be developed in the areas which is underdeveloped or not sufficiently developed. And how we develop it through practice, through state practice, through legislation and judicial decisions. So I was saying that UN General Assembly is, or UN itself is a creator of law. It's not that simple, but obviously when there are, we have seen in the history where there was, the law was deficient, UN General Assembly has picked the weaker state practices, sometimes made additions, sometimes made modification, and that's how it helped in the progress of progressive development of international law. And has prepared drafts and modified existing rules. So there has to be some existence of rule, maybe the domestic law of some country, maybe the weak state practice, but it has to be somewhere rooted in the basic principles of law. And then the codification is when there is law already exists in the form of customary international law. And then UN has helped that in the form of a charter or a treaty or a protocol. So in a way, codified the extensive state practice or the precedents or the doctrines of law. But how the UN General Assembly perform these functions, these are what they do, but how they do it. So in 1946, just after, like in a year after the creation of United Nations, they have created a committee, the Committee of 17. The whole purpose of the Committee of 17 was to fulfill the obligation mentioned in Article 13 of the UN Charter. And the committee actually suggested to create a permanent institution, a permanent organ of the UN that can help the UN and its organs and other agencies to work together in the development and codification of international law. And that's how International Law Commission was created. And we will see what International Law Commission does. For the student of international law, I know that at least a couple of there are there. ILC, International Law Commission, International Law Committee are two different things. And ILC, International Law Commission, that we're talking about right now, is a UN body and has a more profound function to perform. Please, next slide. So ILC has a 34-member commission, and these 34 members are not like as such representative of their countries, obviously nominated by their countries, but they are expert in their own right. They come together, they work together, and they are appointed, nominated by state, elected by UNGA, and then they work for the promotion of progressive development of international law. The focus of the International Law Commission is on public international law, but it can take on the issues with regard to private international law. We will talk about more about this function later, and whether ILC actually perform this function or not. So what is the process, how they actually help in making law? So what normally whenever there is an issue, for example, let's say diplomatic immunity treaties, or any other law which is underdeveloped, and UN takes the responsibility to develop that law. So they appoint a rapporteur among their members, and then they created a work plan, and they collect data and information from the countries through a questionnaire. Then they make a draft, take input from experts, then formal input is taken from countries, and then if the draft is satisfied, the ILC is satisfied with the draft, they share it with the Secretary General for review and more publicity. And then if there are any revisions or changes, they are incorporated into the draft, and then they adopt the draft at the commission level, and then it's submitted to the UN General Assembly for further action, including ratification, adoption. Actually, ILC has done a lot of great things. The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, which is the basis of one of the basic documents of international law, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relation, Vienna Convention of Consular Relation, and the Statute of the Rome Statute, or the Statute of the International Criminal Court, were actually developed by International Law Commission. So it actually helps. And what are these principles? For example, the Vienna Convention of Diplomatic Relation, mostly the customary law was codified. In the case of Rome Statute, existing precedents and certain modifications were made, and the law was developed. So these are some of the examples how UNGA through International Law Commission has contributed into the development and codification, and we'll see how this has also affected the implementation of international law. Next slide, please. So we talked about the private international law part. We have seen the examples of Vienna Convention, so series of Vienna Convention, the Rome Statutes. Mostly it has dealt with the public international law thing. So private international law aspect was ignored by ILC. Some say it was because of time, some say it because it was expertise, some said interest. But anyways, private international law was ignored, especially with regard to trade. And there was a need because you know how the globalization has affected the trade, or was at that time picking up, the differences were starting to emerge. So there was a need to harmonize international law. And then Hungary gave this proposal in 1966, which has created the United Nations Commission of International Trade Law, UNISTRAL, which the whole idea was to promote an adoption of international convention, model laws, and uniform laws. And it also helped in the codification of the wider acceptance of international trade terms, provision, and practices. So then UNSTAL has helped in the codification and application of convention and laws. Again, it is a 70 member states representing. These are not expert, but representative of states, and they work together, do their legal research, prepare reports, drafts, and commentary on the legal text. Again, UNG, unlike the work of ILA, they actually don't adopt the text created by UNSTAL, but they do take the stock taking of what they're doing, and acknowledge whatever have they worked on. And again, they have done amazingly. A lot of trade law treaties that we see today were created by them. There's a long list, but here I'm just mentioning just to see the impact. The Hamburg rules, carriage of goods by sea, UNISTRAL arbitration and conciliation rules, things that are directly related to how Pakistan has dealt with different arbitration cases under these rules. Please, next slide. Next slide. Oh, so sixth committee. Now, sixth committee is one thing that which is known as the legal committee. It contributes a lot again into the in the development of international law and the codification of international law. The biggest contribution was actually the draft of Convention on the Prevention of punishment of genocide, crime of genocide, which is actually Genocide Convention in simple words. Why I'm saying it's the biggest contribution, because today, if you see half of the cases at ICJ doc, obviously I'm exaggerating, but a lot of cases at ICJ doc today are related to Genocide Convention. This draft was prepared by legal committee. Unfortunately, after this convention, they never actually drafted any other convention, but they normally do see articles. They do review articles of different conventions adopted by the UN General Assembly, the declarations. So a lot of declarations that are adopted by UNGA are drafted by sixth committee. Sixth committee or the legal committee also reviews the ICJ advisory opinion questions submitted by the states. But the biggest thing that has impacted Pakistan especially is that there is a subcommittee of this legal committee which works on the terrorism, and a lot of terrorism related, in fact, all of the terrorism related conventions are actually drafted by or work around, or their implementation is enforced by the six committees subcommittee. And all the resolutions are drafted by six committee. So another work that sixth committee or the legal committee does is that all other subsidiary organs, like including ILA, submit their annual report to the sixth committee, and on the behalf of the UNGA and Secretary General, they actually review the work of all these committees. They do another thing which is important to make sure that there's the conversation about international law goes on, which helps in the development, which is the International Law Week, where the legal advisors from different countries come together and hold a dialogue on international law issues. So this is also one thing that contributes a lot in the development of international law, and obviously under the umbrella of UNGA. Please, next slide. Obviously, the UNGA does a lot of different things, and obviously they have contributed a lot. There's not enough time to talk about all those things. Whether it's a legal subcommittee on outer space that has helped in creation of at least 4 major conventions on dealing with outer space and sun and other things in orbit. Then there is a Law of Sea Convention conference, which was held under the auspices of UNGA. Then United Nations has also helped in the creation of statutes of ICTY. Yugoslavia's tribunals statute was prepared by UN Secretary General through the UN Secretariat Office of Legal Affairs. And then obviously it was adopted by UN Security Council. We will discuss that later. Then there is a trade-related work that UNGA does, and climate and climate conferences. And then one of the biggest contribution was actually the adoption of the UDHR, which is the base document for all other UN documents on human rights. Next slide, please. So the question is whether UNGA creates and helping the international law. Actually, they don't, but they do help in, because see, the UNGA resolutions are not sources of international law, as mentioned in the statute of the ICJ. However, because it's a collective will because all the states are member, and their collective will is expressed to the passage of resolutions. So that's an example or evidence of state practice, and state practice lead to the development of customary international law. So many customary international law practices regard to self-determination, human rights, and many other areas are actually developed through the practice of the United Nations General Assembly. So resolutions are actually the evidence for the existing customary international law, and even recognizing that UN General Assembly resolutions are not binding. But we see how the UDHR, which was just a mere declaration, now almost has a universal acceptance and a great evidence of a customary international law. So other than its bodies, UN resolution, which is as a primary function, primary instrument through which it expresses its collective will, it also helps in the development or codification of international law, by codifying or giving evidence of the state practice of how state thinks about a particular issue. There is an issue of consistent objective here, but I think it's not right forum and right time to talk about that. But I'm just mentioning that I do recognize the limitation of this whole function. Next slide, please. So then comes the United Nations Security Council. There's an American Secretary of State, and he said that the Security Council does not implement the law, but it is actually the law. Obviously, it's a slightly aggressive statement, but we have seen the United Nations Security Council has acted in ways which it has implemented resolution over states where they were not party, because United Nations Security Council membership, unlike the membership of United Nations General Assembly, is limited, and only few states come together and make laws for others. I'm saying laws because United Nations Security Council resolutions are actually binding in most cases. So in a way, United Nations Security Council resolution create rights and obligation for states, and are they binding? There's a long discussion about it, but if you look at the commentaries, especially with regard to Article 1325, you will find out that UN Security Council resolution are binding because the charter itself. If you read Article 25 along with Article 103, we understand that UN Security Council resolution in accordance with the UN Charter are binding on states, so much so that if there is any other obligation because of on state because of their bilateral treaties, UN Security Council resolutions will supersede that. So if you can see that I have written both primary and secondary UN law. The primary UN law is charter itself, but secondary UN law are all the resolutions passed by UNG and UNSC. But in this case, we're talking about UN Security Council resolution, which are binding and can it has more power than bilateral treaties, even to the extent where they are in conflict with each other. So that's one way of creating international law, new norms, which helps in the development of law. So then again, it's a great evidence of opinion juris, because states are doing this as a compulsion, and then UN Security Council resolution become the source of or the evidence of state practice or opinion juris specifically. United Nations Security Council has as have seen in the history, have been aggressive. We have seen it to be very timid when it comes to Palestine and other issues. But in other cases, we have seen it to be really aggressive, especially with regard to Iraq. It has almost taken a quasi-judicial nature when it was dealing with the Iraq issue, because it not only declared itself, decided that Iraq has violated many of the principles of international law, but also itself has decided a binding demarcation of boundaries between the state through its resolution. So United Nations Security Council sometimes timid, sometimes aggressive, sometimes borderline, or using power beyond its mandate, but has helped in development of international law that we have seen, especially with regard to terrorism and organized crimes. Next slide, please. So United Nations Security Council has done a lot on the criminal law. It has linked with the development of international criminal law.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but we're a little short on time. So we would really appreciate it if the slides could be done in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. So Geneva Convention has given a responsibility to United Nations Security Council to make sure that the United Nations Geneva Conventions are implemented, which is the law of armed conflict. UN Security Council has performed that function by the establishment of hybrid courts or tribunals, and we have seen ICTY for Yugoslavia and then Rwanda. And then it also has worked along with the special courts of Sierra Leone and in Cambodia. But there is a link between the Rome Statute itself and the United Nations Security Council. The United Nations Security Council can refer issues to the ICC, especially in the cases where there is no, but otherwise ICC doesn't have a jurisdiction, and can actually stop investigation of ICC for a year. And so there's a link between those, and we have talked about how the Rome Statute itself was created by the UN itself. Next slide, please. So, okay, this is probably second last slide, but so we have always talked about ICC, but we have to understand the United Nations Security Council and ICJ also have a great link. UN Charter has empowered United Nations Security Council to refer any dispute for the peaceful settlement dispute to refer that issue to ICJ, not only through advisory opinion, but also for contentious cases. And the UN Security Council has used that power only once. That resulted into curfew channel case between Albania and UK, which was actually the first case that was heard by ICJ. And then an advisory opinion was a Namibia case where South Africa and Namibia has a dispute. ICJ also has a responsibility to make sure the implementation of ICJ's decisions, but United Nations Security Council has never used that power. I hope it will one day soon. The next slide is about United Nations General Assembly and international law, but there's a much because we have ICJ in itself and international law. But my whole idea was, there's a brief slide, but the idea is that we all know how ICJ helps, but ICJ is not there to develop law. It has to be implement law, but obviously the decision, even non-binding decisions, still have the power and authority to declare laws and state practices and customary law. So they have contributed much, but it is not their function to develop or codify law or implement or make sure there's enforcement. Thank you.
Sadia, for such an insightful discussion. We would now welcome comments on the role of the United Nations in fostering peace and cooperation in South Asia from Ambassador Asif Durrani. Ambassador Asif Durrani joined the Foreign Service in 1986, held various diplomatic assignments in Pakistan missions in New Delhi, Tehran, New York, Kabul, and London. He has also served as Ambassador of Pakistan to UAE and Permanent Representative at International Renewable Energy Agency Abu Dhabi, and Ambassador of Pakistan to Tehran and Permanent Representative of Pakistan to the Economic Cooperation Organization. He has also recently served as Pakistan's Special Representative to Afghanistan. Sir.
Thank you, IPRI. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Audible.
Thank you, IPRI. Dr. Raza, President IPRI, colleagues, we celebrate today the UN Day. It is something, this organization we all know came into being after the savages of the two world wars, especially the Second World War, when nuclear weapons were used. And the idea was that if such wars and destruction continue, so probably there would not be a human being on this planet, and especially with the introduction of the nuclear weapons. And now you can also see that there has been some setbacks to the multilateralism for which the United Nations stood for. And since our worthy panelists have already covered the international aspects plus different organs of the United Nations, I think it would be appropriate to also focus on South Asia. And in South Asia, when we say it is just not India and Pakistan, but also Afghanistan is also included because it's also a member of the SARC. And then there are linkages which the United Nations had created right from the very beginning. For instance, with this Kashmir crisis cropping up in 1948, United Nations entered both in India and Pakistan. The United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, UNMOGIP, is there since 1948 onwards till date. Their presence in Pakistan and India is very much, it's a proof of the dispute which is still unresolved. So it's the United Nations presence actually which gives a ray of hope, a beacon of hope to the international community that peace would not be disturbed. Unfortunately, there have been 3 wars between Pakistan and India. Still, it was the United Nations which intervened. And it was due to United Nations good offices that war was stopped. And then stock taking took place. And again, UNMOGIP played a role, although it was about the Kashmir dispute, but otherwise, even in 65 war and 71 war, United Nations was very much involved. And then when we look at the United Nations role between India and Pakistan, from 1948 till mid-60s, it was actively involved in resolving the Kashmir dispute. Scores of United Nations Security Council resolutions are a testimony to this involvement and United Nations positive role. McNaughton report, Dixon reports are considered as reference books when you talk about disputes. And when you talk about ways and means how to resolve disputes. So these are very important, you can say, tools which the United Nations applies in the resolution of disputes. Second aspect I would want to bring to your notice is, for instance, Dr. Toral Yamin had very ably and very elaborately discussed about Pakistan's role in peacekeeping. And Pakistan, in fact, gave the ultimate sacrifice. It's almost, he quoted the statistics of 181 Pakistani soldiers, men and women. They laid down their lives, including 27 officers. And he also talked about the Somalia episode in which our 24 peacekeepers laid down their lives and which has been internationally acknowledged. So it is a symbiotic relationship which at least Pakistan can rightly claim that it has with the United Nations. And this relationship is also testament to almost 24 UN agencies are working in Pakistan. Almost the same number of UN agencies are working in India, and in Bangladesh, and when you talk about, and especially Maldives, which is in fact under threat to be no more on the planet Earth. The manner temperatures are rising, so Maldives can perhaps may not be present physically. So these are real threats to which the United Nations role is very much there in offering technical advice as well as offering solutions to the problems. So this is what I wanted to highlight. Now I want to bring your attention to the United Nations role in Afghanistan, right from the very beginning. With the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, mostly it was actually the legitimacy of the action taken by the former Soviet Union, which was questioned overwhelmingly at the UN General Assembly. While the former Soviet Union would not allow the UN Security Council to intervene because it would use veto, which it used earlier also, say later on the Kashmir resolutions, subsequent resolutions, but it did not enjoy the legitimacy. So here what I'm trying to underscore is that United Nations is also an agency which gives legitimacy to different actions. Soviet Union did not enjoy the legitimacy. Secondly, United States did not enjoy the legitimacy while it invaded Iraq in 2003. So it is an agency which, whether we like it or not, or whether we implement its charter principles, it is the only agency which gives legitimacy to any action. So therefore, United States action in Afghanistan enjoyed legitimacy under the UN Security Council resolutions under Chapter 7, but when it went to Iraq, it did not enjoy that legend. So here, why I say about this legitimacy, what action India has taken on 5th August 2019 in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that they have done away with the special status of the Jammu and Kashmir under the Indian Constitution. They have done away with Articles 370 and 35A. But the issue is, it does not enjoy international legitimacy. More importantly, India did try to host elections in the illegally occupied Kashmir Valley. When it first came up, UN Security Council Resolution 91, adopted in 1951, clearly said that whatever action you want to take at the administrative level or political level would not constitute the exercise of right to self-determination by the Kashmiri people unless done through a UN-supervised plebiscite. Clearly worded. This is what the wording I've quoted. So, therefore, when a dispute remains, it remains. So in the South Asian context, Kashmir is the oldest dispute which is still on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council. Despite India's many attempts in the past, India could not remove Jammu and Kashmir dispute from the agenda of the UN Security Council. Reason that for that to happen, the parties in the dispute have to be unanimous in removing it from the agenda. So it is quite obvious, despite the fact that our Indian friends, they may try to hoodwink the international public opinion as if they have done the final solution or they have come up with a final solution of the Kashmir dispute. This has not happened, and it will not happen unless there is an amicable solution in which the Kashmiris exercise their right to self-determination is exercised and agreed by Pakistan. So these are the aspects which I wanted to bring it to your kind attention as far as South Asia is concerned. UNMOGIP's presence in India and Pakistan itself is a testimony of the legitimacy of the disputes and Kashmiris' right to exercise their right to self-determination. UNMOGIP Indians are not cooperating with the UNMOGIP staff in the occupied Kashmir, but here UNMOGIP has free access all along the line of control to report. And this is what in the United Nations political department, actually their reporting carries weight, and which is why that India has been careful, and it has to be careful. The reason is that unless you resolve it, this is not going to happen without that. And then we should also be mindful of United Nations' role as a whistleblower. United Nations has always, in fact, whether its whistleblowing makes an impact or not, but United Nations enjoys the mandate to be a whistleblower. And which is why that on and off when there are crises. For instance, this Palestinian genocide. So, United Nations Secretary General has been quite upright, and which is why Israel had to declare him as a persona non grata, which is unusual, unprecedented. And but this is happening. This is real politics. We are not saying that real politics would not play its role in the international affairs, in the conduct of diplomacy or multilateral politics. But at the same time, it is very much there. And as I said already, with regard to the legitimacy aspect, that is also very much there. So overall, when we talk about the role United Nations has played in South Asia and the cooperation, it has been very much. For instance, getting rid of malaria, smallpox, and then also as far as Green Revolution is concerned, the United Nations agencies have played a very pioneering role and very admirable role in bringing up, in improving the poverty levels and in bringing the people at par. It is still a continuing struggle, unfortunately, between India and Pakistan. The relationship is such that because of that, now SARC itself is in a limbo, it's in a freeze. And then it is, South Asia is the only perhaps least integrated region economically that is also contributing to the poverty of the region. So the need of the hour is that United Nations, we as Pakistan has always done it, and we should continue to lend our full support to the UN actions, because we, in our policy circles, policy-making circles, it is also a firm belief that it's the multilateral diplomacy which can play its due role, rightful role in the conduct of relationship at the regional and international level. And since Pakistan is also a nuclear weapon state, nuclear power, so Pakistan's responsibilities also, in fact, it has increased as a responsible member of the international community. So I'll stop here, and if there are questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I would like to ask our audience that please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat box to ask any questions. And I would also request you to please keep your questions brief so that we can address most of your concerns. Thank you.
Dr. Savia, can you hear me?
Khatija here has a question. Yes.
Dr. Savia, given the dynamic nature of the global relations, how relevant is customary international law in today's context? And do you think that the UN should push for more codification of the evolving norms, especially in areas like cyber warfare and climate justice?
I think first part of the question, the answer is yes. Customary law, international law, given the relationship between countries, is important. But the biggest problem, I think, I kept mentioning that in context of Indus Water Treaty, is that best of the customary international law, until unless there is a dispute settlement mechanism, binding dispute settlement mechanism, customary international law has no value in terms of relationship between two countries. So we might have more rights in customary international law with regard to, let's say, India with regard to water. But if there is no Indus Water Treaty, where will you take those rights? So then enforcement is important. So customary international law is important for the development, but the enforcement is a difficulty. So treaties with a binding dispute resolution system has more value in terms of international law. The second part is yes, I think I think there are UN specialized agencies working on that to develop international convention. Obviously, in today's day and age, as Hashmi Saab was mentioning, the power competition between the states, between China and US, it's difficult to come and others. It's difficult to come and have a unanimous agreement on or convention treaty on issues like climate and cyber, but yes, a customary international law is helping. There are some form of soft laws being developed, agreed between states, and essentially this will lead to something permanent and something more binding in terms of convention. And yes, and that's why it's important for states when they're voting for international resolution, even if non-binding, in their bilateral agreement, make sure that they implement the principles which will be again form the customary international law. So yes.
I have a question.
Ms. Maham has a question.
So my question is from Ambassador Rani. So you spoke about the role of the UN as a whistleblower, and right now in the Palestine issue as well, we've seen that the UN has created this committee on Palestine, which is doing its investigation both into the role of Palestine and the role of Hamas in escalating the conflict and committing war crimes. But considering that, the role of Israel, considering that Israel has completely blocked the UN from investigating and collaborating with the UN in providing evidence or evidence gathering, how effective do you think the UN's role of investigating these crimes and as a whistleblower in actually being substantively positive about it becomes? Because we've seen that countries, like most of the countries who are now rogue states, who block the UN from even entering their territories to conduct investigations. So do you think that because even to blow the whistle, there needs to be evidentiary weight behind it? So how do you think, how does the UN like go around that mandate?
Thank you, Maham. A very good question. I think it is the real politics then now we are talking about. UN is very much there. It has already blown the whistle. It has already alerted, and UN is also on the ground. UN workers have laid down their lives. They have been maimed. So they were the first ones, the first responders actually to ameliorate the plight of the Palestinian people, whether in health sector or delivering food and other amenities of life. So, but here, unfortunately, the United States' role would be questioned, and it is being questioned, not only them, but also the West. And they are equal culprits. I'm sorry I have to do that, but they cannot absolve of their responsibility. Otherwise, it is, if the United States wants today, within an hour, they can tell Israel to stop it, and they can. It has happened in the past, so it can happen now also. So it is something we are, and then if you stretch the argument further, then I think now we are entering into an era of many polarity. Now you can say regionalism is cropping up, and which is actually would be a sad comment on United States' role, which it has failed to play. So that's what I can.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. I have a question for all the speakers. One of the biggest criticisms that international law faces today is of selective compliance. That there remains a power imbalance when it comes to the enforcement of international law. So how do you think the UN is countering such criticisms?
Sadia.
Dr.
It's
Sal.
not. Actually, it's not, and it's not nothing new. We see it in a more blatant way today because of Palestine. But as I've mentioned, it has always been more active with regard to Iraq, for example, right? But with other annexation, it has been more lenient. It has been more aggressive when it comes to Russia, but can't do much because of its veto. But the point is that it's never been fair and equal, and I don't think so. It has any intention of going to be more fair and equal, because the structure of the UN is such that there are some states which have more power, more rights, and it was made for the victors of the Second World War and to protect their rights and balance the politics of the world. Obviously, there are countries which are thinking of reforms and pushing for reforms, but the point is that even those countries who are pushing for reforms are not for equality or fairness. They want their share in the powers, power sharing formula. So I think when it comes to real politics, when it comes to the global politics, I think international law is the first casualty. It's an interesting thing while working in national security for the last 5 years almost, my biggest understanding was that the whole spectrum of the national interest and the national security are exception to international law. So in a way, for a lot of countries, international law and their national security interests don't always come together, and that's the reality that you cannot ignore. So I don't see at least in today's world, which is so polarized, so marred with conflicts and everything, I don't see a fair and equal and implementation of international law. This will always be selective as long as the UN is in the current structure and form. But even if you forget about the UN, it's even with the countries. I don't even talk about other countries. I talk about Pakistan, and without going into specific, Pakistan's reaction towards different disputes, different issues, is different depending upon of the parties of the conflict or the issue. So the world is not a fair place, and I don't think so. I have done this, so now I say don't look for fairness and equality in international law, especially in international politics.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadia. This brings us to the end of our session. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the speakers and participants. To conclude our webinar, I am honored to invite President IPRI Ambassador Dr. Raza Mohammed again to share his concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for enlightening us on various aspects. There is no doubt that the United Nations has done a lot since its inception, and has contributed a lot towards security in traditional as well as non-traditional security areas, more in the non-traditional security areas, as it has been alluded to various speakers. In the traditional security areas also, United Nations has been mostly successful, less in present times where we are facing a grave issue from Israel when the calls for the ceasefire or the humanitarian aid corridor are not being heard to. I think it's a great contribution that Pakistan has made, sending 235,000 people to the United Nations, 48 peacekeeping missions, and 29 countries. And Pakistan firmly stands with the US, supporting it on the Palestine issue or the other such issues. And the challenges which we face, be it in Pakistan or in the globe, cannot be solved by anyone or any country alone. So there is a need of collective approach towards resolving traditional and non-traditional security issues. With this, I thank all of you once again and appreciate Maham, Banu, and Khadija and the team for doing a wonderful work. And thank you, Dr. Sadia, for being with us right from the beginning till now. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Bahut shukriya.
Thank you so much, everyone.